Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Of Mountains and Seas by Emily Renk Hawthorne, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue, Winter 1935. The first glimmers of consciousness seeped in when, with a start, Randall's son realized he couldn't see. At first, he thought it was a moonless night and he was at home in bed, but the feel of his hot breath against the cloth, the binds around his wrists and ankles, and the whirring of the car beneath him proved otherwise. He pulled against the restraints. They must be magic. Like all magic things, he could feel their power, whether it was the warm glow of another shifter or the hum of the restraints that tingled against his skin at that moment. He doubted either of his powers would affect magical restraints, but he would try. The car rumbled to a stop. Voices murmured to each other from the front seat. Doors opened, and the crunch of footsteps came to his door. A vague recent memory surfaced in Randall's mind. He had been leaving the casino when a woman and a man approached him, but that was all he could remember. Based on the situation he was currently in, one of them must have the power of magical binding, and the other must have some sort of sleep-inducing power. Randall sighed. Alcoholic fumes accumulated beneath the cloth and burned his nostrils and eyes. Maybe that second part was his own doing. The door next to Randall opened. Hands yanked him out into the ground and dragged him a few feet before forcing him onto his knees. A sharp pain shot through his left leg, and something clattered next to him, most likely his cane. At least they hadn't thrown it away. One of the people removed the cloth sack from his head, and he was momentarily blinded by the car headlights. He squinted and turned his head. Past the glare of the headlights, outlines of trees towered around them. Aromas of pine and dirt blended with the alcohol on his breath and the gasoline from the car. The man and woman approached from each side, becoming looming silhouettes in front of the car. Randall took his chance and transformed. His bones and joints cracked as they lengthened and spread, a sensation that was second nature for him. Thick, coarse fur sprouted from his skin, absorbing his clothing. His nails elongated into long yellow claws, murderous, yes, useless against the magical restraints. He glared at the two silhouettes that looked half their size before his growing body while snapping at the binds and bellowing to no avail. The woman laughed. In an instant, her body elongated from her neck down, her arms and legs fusing into a serpentine body. A monstrous human-headed snake stood before him, scales glistening in the headlights. The tip of her tail lashed out, smacking Randall across the face. Even a grizzly won't be able to break those. Randall huffed from the blow. He knew that voice and that shifter form. Susan By. But who was the man with her? He almost laughed when he realized. How cute. Mrs. and Mr. By, a wife and husband gangster duo. What was his name again? It didn't matter. Susan was the one in charge. The humor faded. They wouldn't get away with this. He shrunk back to his human form, his bones realigned and his fur reabsorbed into his skin as his clothes reformed. He looked down at his hands, white cords twisted around his wrists, shimmering like snakes coiling around and around. He couldn't break through the binds with sheer strength, but maybe he could burn through them or at least hurtle a fireball at his captors. A tingling sensation arose from his inner core and intensifies as it moved toward his hands. In less than a second, sparks leaped into his palms, burst into flames, and coalesced into a bright burning ball. The restraints remained intact, so he prepared to shoot the fireball at one of the silhouetted figures. At that moment, a ball of water struck the fire. Steam sizzled into the air until both elements were nullified. This time, Mr. By laughed. Did you think we didn't do our homework on you, Randall? That was right. Susan could summon and manipulate water, so that must mean Mr. By had the power of magical binding, and the somnolence that had been his own fault after all. Randall swore under his breath and made a half-hearted promise not to drink as much. He thought about forming another fireball, but knew that even in a best-case scenario, that would only lead to a standoff of fire against water, and he was outnumbered here. But he had a secret weapon that most other shifters did not, another secondary power. Thrusting his hands down onto the ground, he simultaneously melted the ground in front of him and built it back up. He intended to build a wall and then tunnel himself to safety, but suddenly his arms were jerked up from the ground. Another white rope had formed between his wrists to a branch overhead. It pulled his arms up and away from the ground. His stonemasonry was useless if he couldn't touch the ground. As I said, we did our homework on you. Randall cleared his throat. Oh, what do you want? Same thing as you, Susan said. Purity of our kind. To remove the weaknesses of the statics from the shifters. No one wants that more than me, Randall said. Yet you have done little to change the situation, Mr. By said. Even in your position of power and influence, your promises remain empty. Susan transformed into human form, her black coat and trousers reforming where scales had been. She turned to her husband. You should have expected he'd grow a soft spot for the statics. You know that what his son is, right? Randall spat into the dirt. That is precisely why I'm such an ardent supporter of the cause. My son is an abomination. The Bys approached each other and spoke in whispers before turning back to Randall. You have 1 week, Susan said, to change your wife's mind. Randall scoffed under his breath. He had tried everything so far to persuade his wife, who at the young age of 60 had achieved a higher political position than he ever could in his 362 years. And with her popularity, she would most likely be reelected again and again. Yet that didn't bother him. She was beautiful and strong, the strongest shifter he knew, and he respected that. What bothered him was that she coddled the boy, even going so far as to be pro-integration because of him. And the longer she held that view and stayed in power, the more likely it would come to fruition. Integrating shifters and statics would be a death sentence to shifter kind. His son was living proof of that. Somewhere in past generations, static blood had gotten in and wiped out his ability to develop powers. Otherwise, Mr. By said, we'll have to resort to more drastic measures. Shifters dead at the hands of statics is sure to increase anti-integration sentiment. Before Randall could respond, they got into a car and sped off. As the car left, the restraints disintegrated from Randall's wrists and ankles. He sat alone in the dust for several minutes, rubbing his wrists. No one treated him that way, like an animal to be tied and thrown in the dirt. He would not be cowed by threats like some weakling. He would not only show them he could get anti-integration implemented in the council, but he would also make them pay for what they did to him tonight. He massaged his temples, willing a foggy memory to form. Many years ago, he participated in the creation of a special and powerful stone that has since become illegal. Despite his usual inebriation, he had swiped a few unbeknownst to others. He needed them now for protection in case he couldn't change his wife's mind. Otherwise, he shuddered to think of it. But, if necessary, he knew what he'd have to do.